here we go again. We start off with the new movie in a kind of, I know I mentioned Monty Python in that before, but it is a sort of Python-esque Arthurian beginning with this sozzled Merlin, Stanley Tucci, who is going off to a mysterious cave in order to get some help for his embattled kin. And you do half expect somebody to come out of the cave and go, "Fetchez la vache!" You know, we are French, you're English pig dog types. But no, they don't. What they do is that they provide a transformery sort of dragon. Okay, then we come forward to the present, future, the whenever it is. Incidentally, when I'm doing this plot synopsis, if you think it doesn't make any sense, that's because I'm just trying to scramble together the bits of it. It's like standing in a junkyard that's been surrounded by the wreckage of a car, and you're trying to explain that that bit connected to that, and that was there was a carburetor over there, and whatever. So, sort of present, future America, where Transformers are outlawed now, except in some places where they're not, and Marky Mark is helping to hide them in junkyards. Meanwhile, in England, Sir Anthony Hopkins is living with a robot called Cogman, I think, who is clearly ripped off C-3PO. So clearly ripped off C-3PO that at one point Mark Wahlberg says to him, "Oi, C-3PO rip-off," because Michael Bay's idea of funny is to do something profoundly stupid and then point at it and say it out loud. One thing I do stand by, many things I stand by in that thing that you did there, is that Michael Bay does a lot of things, but be funny is generally not one of them. I mean, he is about as funny as the workings of an air filter system. Anyway, somewhere else, Vivian Wembley, who is an Oxford history professor, is explaining to people that Arthurian legends are just legends, and she's doing this while dressed as a stripper, and we know that she's dressed as a stripper because at some point Mark Wahlberg says, "You're wearing a stripper dress." Once again, Michael Bay, do something stupid, but then get somebody to point at it and say it out loud, and that makes it funny. So, out in space, an alien queen is doing something with Optimus Prime to turn him into a nemesis, and then he'll have to come back to Earth to bring about the end of the world, which Sir Anthony Hopkins is very concerned about. Meanwhile, back on Earth, military types are running around doing military-type things in short, bursty bursts that don't make any sense, but have got some sort of, military bursty things in them. And then John Turturro is on the phone talking from somewhere else, trying to cut a deal because he wants to become part of a sort of Dan Brown organisation. And a group of men with stern haircuts are looking sternly at screens and saying stern things in a stern manner. Surely the only way that inevitable disaster can be averted is for Sir Anthony Hopkins to get Marky Mark Wahlberg and the history professor dressed as a stripper together in the same room and explain the plot to them before Michael Bay decides to blow everything up. Here's a clip.
We have guests! What's the matter with you? Oh, check my bits are falling off. Idiot!
What the hell?
Very frisky today. Good girl.
Master, he's a complete knucklehead.
I'm awfully sorry about that, but, you see, he thinks it's still the year 1918 or 1914, something like that, isn't it? I mean, it's late onset of, robot dementia. It's not at all pretty.
Well, I don't know what you're smoking in that pipe, man, but what's going on here? Will you drag me to some Transformer retirement home? Look, somebody better start talking or I'm out of here.
Whoa, okay. Bumblebee, we only met when I was a little boy in short pants. I must have been that tall, maybe taller, or maybe shorter, I can't remember. But...
you?
Face.
B, you know this guy?
Oh, yeah. Let's have a look at this thing.
Well, it's got some good actors in there. Yeah, that's to do the acty bits. Yeah. Although that is, of course...
Is there a smashy bit you could have played us?
Well, yeah, but it just sounds like all the rest of the things, which is that it sounds like an Eistazender Neubauten concert, with the volume turned up to 11. So in that, you heard Sir Anthony Hopkins doing comedy. The fact that the comedy he's doing isn't funny doesn't make any difference because Sir Anthony is laughing all the way to the bank. And every single moment that he's on stage, there is a certain pleasure in just watching a man going, he's spoken very highly of Michael Bay and said he's some kind of genius, but I could just see Sir Anthony going, yep, how much? But yeah, he's a genius. He's an absolute... Want to do another one? Fine, no trouble. Absolutely. Whatever you want, Michael, if the thing keep rolling in. So, the direction is the... so, please throw a book at me for saying so. Thank you. The direction...
that wasn't a book, that was
no,
an
it was
email
a piece of
from a
paper.
listener.
Yeah, fine. The direction is that usual Michael Bay thing of None of this, nothing makes any sense. There isn't any story. There isn't any plot except for everybody pointing at everything and explaining things. I mean, in terms of the pointing and explaining, it is like the Da Vinci Code with robots. But people do point at things and say, "Oh, look, there's a massive planet coming," or "Oh, look, there's a thing happening over there," and you go, "Michael, I can see." But, and incidentally, I saw this on an IMAX 3D screen. But everything is so sort of exactly. So it's the best possible circumstances for seeing it in. It's that usual Bay formula. No matter what's going on screen, we will swirl, we will cut, we will jump, we will just throw all these different. It's the equivalent, putting your head in the popcorn maker or the food blender, and just all the color tones turned up to retina scorch, and that soundtrack that sounds like, as I said before, Einstürzende Neubauten meet Aerosmith. Because that will take our minds off the fact that none of this is engaging or making any sense at all. The next thing is that despite the excoriating reviews and despite the fact that many people have said, there's been lots and lots of one-star responses to this is not the worst Transformers film by quite some way. In fact, I was less angered by it than many of the Transformers films. I mean, if you heard in that montage that we did before, the thing I was getting annoyed about before was the leeriness, the aggressiveness, all those things. In this particular case, I was less bothered, and I was less bothered for a number of reasons. One of them is it's on the shorter side in terms of the Transformers. I mean, it feels terribly long, but it is actually one of the shorter Transformers, not the longest Transformers movie by any means. It does suffer from the usual Michael Bay thing of having language in a 12 certificate film that is completely inappropriate for a 12 certificate film. I went to the BBFC site. They said there is some moderate bad language as well as, and it lists a whole load of words, none of which I can read out on the radio that feature regularly in the thing. And I know a lot of people have tweeted saying, I'm just amazed that there is this much cussing and profanity. And for me, he takes sort of absolute great pleasure in that. How we talked before about one of the previous films had half of an obscenity that was said in a way that implied the rest of half of the obscenity. You just think, Michael, this is a 12 certificate movie, really lay off. And the fact that, as usual, he does that thing about, yes, he has a heroine who is sort of strong, but then he makes her wear a dress that enables Mark Wahlberg to say the thing about you're dressed as a stripper. But it doesn't do the Rosie Huntington-Whiteley thing of introducing the character by quite literally looking up her, dress or towel as she's walking up the stairs. It doesn't have a comic interlude in which people discuss the legal points of the so-called Romeo clause, which is just one of the most unbelievably tasteless things I've seen in mainstream cinema recently. It doesn't have racially stereotyped supporting characters who are right, front and centre, that remind you of what the world was like before the civil rights movement changed it. What it does have is Sir Anthony Hopkins just enjoying himself. We're not enjoying it. I mean, the jokes aren't funny and the comedy isn't funny, and he can be quite funny in some things, but he's not funny here. But at least he looks like he's having a good time. And there is also an indication that Michael Bay has listened to some of his critics saying, for heaven's sake, Mike, this locker room testosterone stuff, can you attempt to kind of balance it out? And although none of his attempts work, and they're all completely clumsy and foolish. I mean, he's got to go, okay, let's have a strong woman, but can I put her in a stripper? As long as somebody gets to make the line about that. But it is less leering than the previous films. So overall, rather than making me furious, what it did was I became a bit comatose. I mean, it's a terrible slog, and you can drift in and out of it, and nothing of any consequence is happening, no matter how loud it is. The constant explanation of it makes you think, well, actually, this might work as a radio play because everyone's constantly telling you what's going on. And there's a moment when they go to Stonehenge, and I did think of that Spinal Tap. Yeah, there's a bit when I did think of that Spinal Tap thing about no one knows who they were or what they were doing. And I laughed at that joke, and that joke isn't in the film. So the film inspired me to think of a joke in my head that made me laugh. So overall, I mean, it's terrible. It is really, really ineptly poor, filmmaking. It's crashingly loud, mind-bendingly dull, utterly without coherence and purpose other than as a money-making thing. But it is less obnoxious than the previous Transformers films. It is by no means the worst. And as opposed to making me angry, it just made me sleepy and tired.